Hello again, Jared Pitts here, and today I'm going to be reading another article by Dr. Ray Peat. This one, again, can be found on his website, raypeat.com, under the article section. And before I get into the article, just wanted to remind you that I have a new website up, MissouriHealthCoach.com. And if you're needing help in your health journey, then I would love to be able to do that. You can set up a free 15-minute consultation on that website, or you can email me at MissouriHealthCoach@gmail.com, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Okay, back to the article. This article is called Salt, Energy, Metabolic Rate, and Longevity. And I just want to note that this topic specifically holds a dear and close place in my heart because of who Dr. Peat references in this article. He references a few times Dr. Tom Brewer. And Dr. Peat expands upon Dr. Brewer's research. And the reason that this specific topic holds a close place in my heart is because Dr. Brewer, he has a diet called the Dr. Brewer Pregnancy Diet, which is why I was introduced to him, because of the multiple miscarriages I had, or my wife had, early on in our marriage. And I am just so thankful that Dr. Brewer provided his research for free, and that Dr. Peat also is providing this research to us for free. So I'll show you his website later, but I just wanted to note that Dr. Brewer is helping thousands and thousands of women leading up to pregnancy, through it, and afterwards. And if you haven't heard of that pregnancy diet, then now you have. I hope that that is a help to you, and I hope you can share that with your friends and family. But anyway, we'll get deeper into that here in a bit. Just wanted to note that Dr. Brewer and Dr. Peat were a huge help in helping me understand true physiology, and through understanding their research, we were able to have successful pregnancies. So anyway, more on that later. This is how it goes. In the 1950s, when the pharmaceutical industry was beginning to promote some new chemicals as diuretics to replace the traditional mercury compounds, Walter Kempneri's low-salt rice diet began to be discussed in the medical journals and other media. The diuretics were offered for treating high blood pressure, pulmonary edema, heart failure, idiopathic edema, and just for your reference, idiopathic essentially meaning we don't know where this edema is coming from. So, way to make it sound fancy. Orthostatic edema, again, orthostatic meaning just when you're standing up, and obesity, and other forms of water retention, including pregnancy. And since they function by causing sodium to be excreted in the urine, their sale was accompanied by advising the patients to reduce their salt intake to make the diuretic more effective. It was clear to some physicians and to most veterinarians that salt restriction, especially combined with salt-losing diuresis, was very harmful during pregnancy. But that combination became standard medical practice for many years, damaging millions of babies. And I can't remember where this story comes from, but I think it's from the Vaccine Friendly Plan book from Dr. Paul Thomas. But I believe there's a story in that book where he talks about them creating a formula for babies that was a sodium-free formula, which essentially created a bunch of retardation. So, needless to say, sodium has some importance. Despite numerous publications showing that diuretics could cause the edematous, the prefix there being edema, edematous problems that they were supposed to remedy, they have been one of the most profitable types of drug. Dietary salt restriction has become a cultural cliché, largely as a consequence of the belief that sodium causes edema and hypertension. Salt restriction, according to a review of about 100 studies by Alderman in 2004, lowers the blood pressure a few points, but that generally doesn't relate to better health. In one study of 3,000 people over the course of 4 years, there was a clear increase in mortality in the individuals who ate less salt. An extra few grams of salt per day was associated with a 36% reduction in coronary events. And that's from Alderman et al. 95. Another study, more than 11,000 people over the course of 22 years, also showed an inverse relation between salt intake and mortality. And that's from Alderman et al. 1997. Tom Brewer, an obstetrician who devoted his career to educating the public about the importance of prenatal nutrition, emphasizing adequate protein, especially milk, calories, and salt, was largely responsible for the gradual abandonment of the low salt plus diuretics treatment for pregnant women. He explained that sodium in association with serum albumin is essential for maintaining blood volume. Without adequate sodium, the serum albumin is unable to keep water from leaving the blood and entering the tissues. The tissues swell as the volume of blood is reduced. Okay, so there's our first reference to Dr. Brewer. I'm going to just switch over to his website over here. So this is drbrewerpregnancydiet.com, and this is an amazing resource if you're trying to get pregnant or are pregnant, especially if you're having some of the common issues that women have in pregnancy. And so it is all just laid out if you're interested in the physiology. He's got a tab for that aspect of it. And I mean, it is just an amazing resource. Very basic table right here where he talks about and references where this is from. A high salt diet, toxemia 37 out of 1,000 versus low salt diet 97 out of 1,000 having toxemia. And so a lot of these things are just twice as common in people that have a low salt diet. And he gets into all of the physiology. You can look at specific topics like salt, water, diuretics, twin pregnancy, and it is just extremely helpful and covers most everything that you would be interested in learning in regards to pregnancy. So I could not recommend this website more. And then on top of that, in Facebook, there is a women's group for this specific diet, and any questions you might have or you don't see the results that you think you should be seeing, an amazing resource on Facebook. And the woman that manages that group is just incredible. Back to the article. During pregnancy, the reduced blood volume doesn't adequately nourish and oxygenate the growing fetus, and the reduced circulation to the kidneys causes them to release a signal substance, renin, that causes the blood to circulate faster under greater pressure. A low salt diet is just one of the things that can reduce kidney circulation and stimulate renin production. Bacterial endotoxin and other things that cause excessive capillary permeability, edema, or shock-like symptoms will activate renin secretion. The blood volume problem isn't limited to the hypertension of pregnancy toxemia. And here we have a quote from a study from 1976. Plasma volume is usually lower in patients with essential hypertension than in normal subjects. Several studies of preeclampsia or toxemia of pregnancy showed that supplementing the diet with salt would lower the woman's blood pressure and prevent the other complications associated with toxemia. And there's a reference there. It has been known for many years that decreasing sodium intake causes the body to respond adaptively, increasing the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, or RAAS. The activation of the system is recognized as a factor in hypertension, kidney disease, heart failure, fibrosis of the heart, and other problems. Sodium restriction also increases serotonin, activity of the sympathetic nervous system, and plasminogen activator inhibitor type 1, or PAI1, which contributes to the accumulation of clots and is associated with breast and prostate cancer. The sympathetic nervous system becomes hyperactive in preeclampsia, and there is a study there. Despite the general knowledge of the relation of dietary salt to the RAA system and its application by Brewer and others to the prevention of pregnancy toxemia, it isn't common to see the information applied to other problems, such as aging and the stress-related degenerative diseases. Many young women periodically crave salt and sugar, especially around ovulation and premenstrually, when estrogen is high. Physiologically, this is similar to the food cravings of pregnancy. Premenstrual water retention is a common problem, and physicians commonly offer the same advice to cycling women that was offered as a standard treatment for pregnant women: the avoidance of salt, sometimes with a diuretic. But when women premenstrually increase their salt intake, according to their craving, the water retention can be prevented. And since he's talking about estrogen being high, I just wanted to note that this is something that people call estrogen dominance, right? Meaning not that we have more estrogen than progesterone, but we have a higher ratio of estrogen than we should have to progesterone. And this is an interesting fact that you might find interesting as well, but estrogen is measured in what are called, I believe, picograms, and then progesterone is measured in nanograms. And the reason for that is there are 1,000 picograms in 1 nanogram. So our bodies have a massive, or should have, a lot more progesterone than estrogen. And it just goes to show what is good for our bodies, right? Why do we have so much less estrogen, or should have so much more less estrogen than progesterone? It's because progesterone is so protective, whereas estrogen is there for specific circumstances. Okay, moving on. Blood volume changes during the normal menstrual cycle, and when the blood volume is low, it is usually because the water has moved into the tissues, causing edema. When estrogen is high, the osmolarity of the blood is low. And there's a couple of studies. Hypothyroidism, which increases the ratio of estrogen to progesterone, is a major cause of excessive sodium loss. The increase of adrenaline caused by salt restriction has many harmful effects, including insomnia. Many old people have noticed that a low-sodium diet disturbs their sleep, and that eating their usual amount of salt restores their ability to sleep. The activity of the sympathetic nervous system increases with aging, so salt restriction is exacerbating one of the basic problems of aging. Chronically increased activity of the sympathetic, or adrenergic, nervous system contributes to capillary leakage, insulin resistance, with increased free fatty acids in the blood, and degenerative changes in the brain. And there's a study there. The flexibility of blood vessels, compliance, is decreased by a low salt diet, and vascular stiffness caused by overactivity of the sympathetic nervous system is considered to be an important factor in hypertension, especially with aging. Pregnancy toxemia, or preeclampsia, involves increased blood pressure and capillary permeability, and an excess of prolactin. Prolactin secretion is increased by serotonin, which is one of the substances increased by salt restriction. But prolactin itself can promote the loss of sodium in the urine, and there's a study there, and contributes to vascular leakage and hypertension. And this is just one of the many examples where these stress responses are self-amplifying, right? You do these things that causes an excess of prolactin, which then causes the things which cause an excess of prolactin, right? And so you have to break this cycle in order to get out of this. All right. In pregnancy, estrogen excess or progesterone deficiency is an important factor in the harmful effects of sodium restriction and protein deficiency. A deficiency of protein contributes to hypothyroidism, which is responsible for the relative estrogen excess. Protein, salt, thyroid, and progesterone happen to be thermogenic. Right? They create heat. Heat is energy, right? Increasing heat production and stabilizing body temperature at a higher level. Prolactin and estrogen lower the temperature set point. Okay, and I love listening to Georgi Dinkoff talk about prolactin, and I've appreciated that he's kind of given that as one of these blood markers that you can do that is an indication that your body is under a lot of stress, right? A lot of these blood tests, they'll take this snapshot in time of these things that fluctuate a lot more than maybe what prolactin would. And so if you, again, I don't give advice, I'm just saying, based on what I've listened to from him, prolactin might be a good test to do in order to get an idea of where you are at health-wise. Moving on, the downward shift of temperature and energy metabolism in toxemia or salt deprivation tends to slow the use of oxygen, increasing the glycolytic use of sugar and contributing to the formation of lactic acid rather than carbon dioxide. In preeclampsia, serum lactate is increased even while free fatty acids are interfering with the use of glucose. One way of looking at those facts is to see that a lack of sodium slows metabolism, lowers carbon dioxide production, and creates inflammation, stress, and degeneration. Rephrasing it, sodium stimulates energy metabolism, increases carbon dioxide production, and protects against inflammation and other maladaptive stress reactions. In recent years, Weizmann's wear and tear theory of aging and Pearl's rate of living theory have been clearly refuted by metabolic studies that are showing that intensified mitochondrial respiration decreases cellular damage and supports longer lifespan. Many dog owners are aware that small dogs eat much more food in proportion to their size than big dogs do, and small dogs have a much greater life expectancy than big dogs, in some cases about twice as long, and there's a study there. Organisms as different as yeasts and rodents show similar association of metabolic intensity and lifespan. A variety of hamster with a 20% higher metabolic rate lived 15% longer than hamsters with an average metabolic rate. And there's a study there. Individuals within a strain of mice were found to vary considerably in their metabolic rate. The 25% of the mice with the highest rate used 30% more energy per gram of body weight than the 25% of the lowest metabolic rate and lived 36% longer. And there's another study. The mitochondria of these animals are quote-unquote uncoupled. That is, their use of oxygen isn't directly proportional to the production of ATP. This means that they are producing more carbon dioxide without necessarily producing more ATP, and that even at rest they are using a considerable amount of energy. So just as a summary of this last portion, this idea of uncoupling, Dr. Peat references this quite a bit. He references an article on the internet called Uncoupled and Surviving, and I'll just read a little bit of a quote from another interview that he had. He says, "It's about a mouse that is naturally very hypermetabolic. They burn energy at a tremendous rate, and they live much, much longer than ordinary mice. And so this is the general rule that the high metabolizers live longer than the low metabolizers, and they tend to have bigger brains." He notes that as well. And you can see how that goes directly against these ideas that have been pushed in the past. I'm sure a lot of people still believe them, that you have to preserve your energy so that you live longer, right? Oh, you don't want to, you only have a set number of heartbeats that you're going to have in this life. And if you do a whole bunch of work or you use too much energy, all these ideas, it's this scarcity mindset versus an abundant mindset. And I don't get too far into that whole sphere, but you'll find some of that in Dr. Peat's work. This whole mindset aspect of health, the idea of learned helplessness and getting out of that with creativity and fun, and things of that nature. One important function of carbon dioxide is to regulate the movement of positively charged alkali metal ions, such as sodium and calcium. When too much calcium enters a cell, it activates many enzymes, prevents muscle and nerve cells from relaxing, and ultimately kills the cell. The constant formation of acidic carbon dioxide in the cell allows the cell to remove calcium, along with the small amount of sodium which is constantly entering the cell. When there is adequate sodium in the extracellular fluid, the continuous inward movement of sodium ions into the resting cell activates an enzyme, sodium potassium ATPase, causing ATP to break down into ADP and phosphate, which stimulates the consumption of fuel and oxygen to maintain an adequate level of ATP. Increasing the concentration of sodium increases the energy consumption and carbon dioxide production of the cell. The sodium, by increasing carbon dioxide production, protects against the excitatory, toxic effects of the intracellular calcium. Hypertonic solutions containing more than the normal concentration of sodium, from about twice normal to 8 or 10 times normal, are being used to resuscitate people and animals after injury. Rather than just increasing blood volume to restore circulation, the hypertonic sodium restores cellular energy production, increasing oxygen consumption and heat production while reducing free radical production, improves the contraction and relaxation of the heart muscle, and reduces inflammation, vascular permeability, and edema. Seawater, which is hypertonic to our tissues, has often been used for treating wounds, and much more concentrated salt solutions have been found effective for accelerating wound healing. And there's a study. There have been several publications suggesting that increasing the amount of salt in the diet might cause stomach cancer, because countries such as Japan with a high salt intake have a high incidence of stomach cancer. Studies in which animals were fed popular Japanese foods, salted cuttlefish guts, broiled salted dried sardines, pickled radish, and soy sauce, besides a chemical carcinogen, showed that the Japanese foods increased the number of tumors. But another study adding only soy sauce with a salt content of about 18% to the diet did not increase the incidence of cancer. In another, it was protective against stomach cancer. And there's the study there. Several studies show that dried fish and pickled vegetables are carcinogenic, probably because of the oxidized fats and other chemical changes and fungal contamination, which are likely to be worse without the salt. Animals fed dried fish were found to have mutagenic urine, apparently as a result of toxic materials occurring in various preserved foods. And there is a study there. And this can be difficult for people to hear because in the alternative health world, fermented foods is pushed pretty heavily. And so this is something to just take into account, right, with everything else. Everything here is so multifaceted. This is another aspect of this alternative health world that maybe hasn't taken everything into account. Although preserved foods develop many peculiar toxins, even fresh fish in the diet have been found to be associated with increased cancer risk. And there's a study there. When small animals were given a milliliter of saturated salt solution with the carcinogen, the number of tumors was increased with the salt. However, when the salt was given with mucin, it had no cancer-promoting effect. Since the large amount of a saturated salt solution breaks down the stomach's protective mucus coating, the stomach cells were not protected from the carcinogen. Rather than showing that salt causes stomach cancer, the experiment showed that a cup or more of saturated salt solution, or several ounces of pure salt, shouldn't be ingested at the same time as a strong carcinogen. Noted. So next time I plan on taking a strong carcinogen, will not take salt with it. Some studies have found pork to be associated with cancer of the esophagus, and there's a study there. Thyroid and other organs and another study. But an experiment with beef, chicken, or bacon diet in rats provides another perspective on the role of salt in carcinogenesis. After being given a carcinogen, rats were fed meat diets containing either 30 or 60% of freeze-dried, fried beef, chicken, or bacon. Neither beef nor chicken changed the incidence of precancerous lesions in the intestine, but the incidence was reduced by 12% in the animals on the 30% bacon diet and by 20% in rats getting the diet with 60% bacon. Salt apparently made the difference. Other protective effects of increased sodium are that it improves immunity, and there's a study, reduces vascular leakiness, and alleviates inflammation, and another study. All of these effects would tend to protect against the degenerative diseases, including tumors, atherosclerosis, and Alzheimer's disease. The RAA system appears to be crucially involved in all kinds of sickness and degeneration, but the protective effects of sodium are more basic than just helping to prevent activation of that system. A slight decrease in temperature can promote inflammation. There's a study there. The thermogenic substances, dietary protein, sodium, sucrose, thyroid, and progesterone, are anti-inflammatory for many reasons, but very likely the increased temperature itself is important. A poor reaction to stress with increased cortisol can raise the body temperature by accelerating the breakdown and resynthesis of proteins. But adaptive resistance to stress increases the temperature by increasing the consumption of oxygen and fuel. In the presence of increased cortisol, abdominal fat increases along with circulating fatty acids and calcium, as mitochondrial respiration is suppressed. When mice are chilled, they spontaneously prefer slightly salty water rather than fresh, and it increases their heat production. There's a study there. When rats are given 0.9% sodium chloride solution with their regular food, their heat production increases and their body fat, including abdominal fat, decreases. Another study. These responses to increased dietary sodium are immediate. Part of the effect of sodium involves regulatory processes in the brain, which are sensitive to the ratio between sodium and calcium. Decreasing sodium or increasing calcium causes the body's metabolism to shift away from thermogenesis and accelerated respiration, so essentially decreasing metabolism. Regulating intracellular calcium by increasing the production of carbon dioxide is probably a basic mechanism in sodium's protection against inflammation and excitatory cell damage and degeneration. Cortisol's suppression of mitochondrial respiration is closely associated with its ability to increase intracellular calcium. Cortisol blocks the thermogenic effects of sodium, allowing intracellular calcium to damage cells. With aging, the tissues are more susceptible to these processes. The thermogenic effects of sodium can be seen in long-term studies as well as short. A low-sodium diet accelerates the decrease in heat production that normally occurs with aging, lowering the metabolic rate of brown fat and body temperature, and increasing the fat content of the body, as well as the activity of the fat synthesizing enzyme. And there's a study. Activation of heat production and increased body temperature might account for some of the GABA-like sedative effects of increased sodium. Increasing GABA in the brain increases brown fat heat production. And there's a study. Activation of heat production by brown fat increases slow wave sleep. Another study. The loss of which is characteristic of aging. In adult humans, the skeletal muscles have heat-producing functions similar to brown fat. Now that inflammation is recognized as having a central role in the degenerative diseases, the fact that renin, angiotensin, and aldosterone all contribute to inflammation and are increased by a sodium deficiency should arouse interest in exploring the therapeutic uses of sodium supplementation and the integrated use of all of the factors that normally support respiratory energy production, especially thyroid and progesterone. Progesterone's antagonism to aldosterone has been known for many years, And the synthetic anti-aldosterone drugs are simply poor imitations of progesterone. But the drug industry is interested in selling new drugs to block the formation and action of each of the components of the RAAS, rather than an inexpensive method such as nutrition to normalize the system. And again, all of these references at the bottom. And I'll just note that some of the ways I get more sodium in my diet and make sure that I'm not depleting my sodium are I don't drink any plain water personally. What I do is we put some type of salt, magnesium, whatever mixture in our water so that we're getting minerals with it. And we'll even put a little maple syrup in our water because from what I understand, a little bit of carbohydrates with that water is what helps you hydrate, right? So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this article and the commentary. Again, if you want help with your health journey, go ahead and visit MissouriHealthCoach.com. You can set up a free 15-minute consultation there. And until next time, God bless.